Hello, my lovely audience. It is once again I, the Blue Princess, here to begin the episode of my lovely podcast, The Mad Rabblings of a Blue Princess. Now, in this week's episode, I'm going to be talking about the first storyline of the IDW Sonic comics. Now, just to clarify one thing beforehand, as I'm reading these comics, I will be using the reading order for the IDW comics from the THANKSKENPENDERS blog, and I will include a link in the description for anyone who wants to see the reading order just so they know how I'll be going through these comics in future videos, okay? Now then, so let's get started. This is a comic I've been wanting to read for a while since I've heard really good things about it, and I knew that Ian Flynn was the head writer, at least for the first I think he's still writing the IDO comics, but I do know at the beginning he was the head writer of the ID comics, and I've heard him praised as like one of the best Sonic writers out there. His work in Archie in particular, like a lot of people credit him to basically like writing the best stuff in the Archie Sonic comics run, and he was even he even got to write the story for Sonic Frontiers. And I know that from what I remember, Sega was the ones who came up with the base premise, like the idea of the story, and then Ian Flynn was the one who wrote it out and did the character dialogue. But I was incredibly impressed by Ian's work in Frontiers. He did a lot to I feel like fix a lot of the problems with Sonic's characterization that was going on about the years, not only making Sonic likable again, and sort of bring back those aspects of his character that I thought were missing after Unleashed, but in general, just a lot of things with improving the character dynamics, making the characterization more consistent and more engaging, as well as definitely making sure to incorporate elements from past games into this in order to make the whole Sonic, basically make the games of the Sonic games really feel like they're all connected, and give us the fact this even though each game is standalone, has its own story, there is this slight feeling of an ongoing story with the characters that I feel like was lost after once we got colors, and the stories definitely started getting a bit more a focus on a slightly more cartoony sort of. They were definitely written to be a bit more like a standard children's cartoon, and there was definitely a bit of I don't agree with the takes that was being ironic or meta, but more of a self-deprecate. There was a bit of a self-deprecating tone to the writing of the Sonic games for a while, and Frontiers is back to the better writing for the characters and story that we've seen in previous games like Unleashed or the adventure games or Heroes or Sonic and the Black Knight. But yeah, I was really impressed by Ian's work in the Frontiers games, so that sort of pushed me to finally come to read the IDW comics. And I started with them instead of the Archie comics because Ian Flynn doesn't write the Archie comics until issue 160. And from what I've heard, while there is some good stuff before that, there's also a lot of bad stuff. And in general, it's just such a massive reading that I kind of wanted to start with EDW first, since it's an easier way to introduce yourself into the comics. It is canon to the games now, so I also think that's an interesting aspect about the comics. And in general, it just seems like it starts off with a higher quality than stuff like the Archie comics, which take a long time to really, really get good. So yeah, started reading the IDW comics, and I already they did a great job of capturing my interest right away. First off, I really like how the first issue opened with a narration sort of explaining the status quo of the Sonic series, where Eggman starts trouble, Sonic hits his butt, and then he goes on to relax until Eggman comes up with more new trouble. And it's also I also love how while they're doing this narration, they're showing artwork of the different boss fights against Eggman, and this comic gets bonus points for showing some of my favorite Eggman mechs, like the Egg Emperor from Sonic Heroes and the Egg Dragoon from Sonic Unleashed. Now, I also think it's really cool how one of the first Eggman robots we see in this game is the Egg Pogs from Sonic Heroes, because they're some of my favorite Eggman robots in Baddies Fight. They just got a very simple, very clean design, and Sonic Heroes is one of my favorite games. I just love playing the game so much despite its problems. So it's really good to see these Egg Pogs come up, and them also being the first ones here is some nice bit of foreshadowing for a later plot reveal. I think the comic does a really good job of establishing that it takes place after the events of forces by showing the people fighting back against the Eggman robots with the Wispins from the Forces game. So it's already like taking elements that were like introduced in the Force game and showing them as like a normal part of the world building and environment of this game. Which again, really good stuff. I also like how we see the civilians sort of fanboying over Sonic because of course, yeah, Sonic is like he's a national icon. He's a hero of this world, so of course it makes sense for people to be like all hyped or fanboy about him. I also really love how Tails, like when he first makes his appearance in the comics, he's not only saving comics, but he's doing it specifically like by flying Sonic out of danger, which is what he would do in the Classics games, starting with I believe Sonic 3, where Tails would help Sonic by like grabbing him and carrying him over ledges. So again, I think that's really clever. I don't know if that was intentional, but a really good part of like introducing Tails in a way that directly calls back to like some of his earlier appearances. And also later we see Sonic and Tails doing like this double spin dash team attack, and it's like really cool. I really love how we see them working tandem. And from what other people told me and from what I've done in my own research is like it appears to be a reference to the team attack from Sonic 4 Episode 2. Now it's not a 1-to-1 because in Sonic 4 Episode 2 they're like it's more like a double cartwheel than a double spin attack. However, it's the only thing I've found from the games that seems to be the most similar to this double spin dash attack, and I've even heard people sort of chalking up the cartwheel thing in Sonic Adventure 4 Adventure 2 being more sound of like limiting visuals and stuff in the game, which like I could buy. Like I don't know, maybe I'm looking into it, maybe that's not the intention Ian or the artist meant, but I kind of like to see it as a reference to that team attack because it's just really cool. I also like how Tails is the one to point out that their fight against the Egg Hammer would have been faster if they had Knuckles, because it's a very fitting reference to the Team Sonic from Sonic Heroes, but it's also makes sense as a reference to Sonic Heroes because like the Egg Hammer enemies were specifically weak to Knuckles. Like when you were fighting those enemies, the game wanted you to switch to Knuckles and use him to take them down. So again, like this game is just this first arc is filled with so many references to Sonic Heroes, and it's so gratifying to see. Like this one itself is really good because, again, not only calling back to Team Sonic, but also referencing the fact that Knuckles himself was the best choice against the Egg Hammers. I also really like how Tails is written in the first issue. Like you can tell he and Sonic are best friends with like a big brother and little brother dynamic, without the comic itself flat out staying it, because like because like the way they interact, it already makes it clear that they have this type of relationship, and it's also very clear that like Tails has the brains and foresight to challenge Sonic's like cocky and free spirited nature, just in the way they sort of banter with one another, the way Tails sort of calls out Sonic's actions or like sort of points out like the things that Sonic himself doesn't notice because he's already like moving in the fast lane and stuff. And I also think it's a good thing how like we see like Tails being concerned about Sonic, because it's another way of like sort of showing that these comics take place after the events of Sources, as well as like addressing Tails' characterization from Forces instead of ignoring it. So one of the biggest problems people have with Forces is that Tails just sort of like becomes a bit of a coward after Sonic sort of disappears. Like there's a scene where like he's trying to fix Omega and then Chaos shows up to attack him, and Tails just sort of goes in a fetal position asking Sonic to help him. And like yeah, definitely that seemed like a sort of off the character moment and a bit of off characterization. But I really like how this comic isn't just going to pretend that didn't happen. It's just going to actually address it and make it sort of a part of Tails's actions in this comic sort of show him growing from that moment, instead of just being like, that didn't happen, we're just going to pretend it didn't happen because people didn't like it, so we're just going to pretend it didn't happen. That stuff you care about, like, I don't like it when stories are like, okay, this thing was bad or people didn't like it, so we're just going to pretend it never happened, put it under the rug, it didn't happen. Because like, I don't know, I feel like I like stories that have this long history, and I like stories that like sort of address the story. So I think stories that like just sort of like can just take whatever stuff they don't like and erase it and pretend it didn't happen, I don't know, it just feels cheap. But yeah, back to Sonic Comics. I really like that like Tails decides to stay behind to help the village instead of tagging along with Sonic, because it's a really good way to show these sort of ideological differences between Sonic and Tails. Like Sonic is a free-spirited, who's always moving forward and looking for the next adventure, whereas Tails is like he's an inventor, he's a builder, someone who focuses on helping people recover and like fixing the damage. So like again, I like this. The like Sonic is the one who's going to move forward. He's going to like try to figure out what the threat is and take it down. But Tails is the one who like because of his nature, he would stop, slow down, and help people rebuild, help fix the problem because that's where Tails' true strengths lie in. Which again, really good characterization. I also like that the first issue ends with the mystery of like who's running the Eggman Empire and Eggman's absence, and like they also this is another instance of a good way the story hints at the true identity, since the person talking has like these dark blue their speech bubbles have like dark blue text, which I'll probably get more into the foreshadowing later when we actually talk about the reveal, but like there's a lot of ways this comic hints at it that I think is like really good. But yeah, in the second issue, I really like the fight scene between Sonic and the Death Crab at the beginning of issue 2 because like Adam Bryce because issue 2 is drawn by Adam Bryce Thomas and their artwork is absolutely fantastic for a Sonic comic. Like they do such a perfect job at translating Sonic's like raw speed and high pass action for the games in this comic. Like the whole thing, like the choreography, the page flow, the speed lines, everything about the way this comic is drawn is just so perfect. It makes you feel like you're actually playing the games and experiencing like the high paced boot sections and the high pass speed. Like that incredible adrenaline rush you get when playing a Sonic game. You feel that when reading this comic. Also, I need to point out that Amy is absolutely adorable in this comic. She's so much fun to read, and I really like this sort of disagreement Sonic and Amy have about whether or not Sonic should return to Resistance or continue running around the world to find clues. Because, like, I think it's a really good way to have, like, sort of Sonic's free spirited nature class with Amy, who has a much more grounded perspective based on her life. Because, like we see in Sonic Adventure games that Amy sort of lives, in comparison to, like, Sonic and Co., who's, like, always on the adventure, always looking for something new to do, she lives a slightly more grounded I guess suburban is best to describe, like because like in Sonic Adventure, it opens on Amy like she's just gone shopping and she's picking up some groceries. So there's very much this aspect that Amy sort of lives this sort of normal grounded life when she isn't on adventures with Sonic and Co. Which again I think is a really good way that this comic sort of integrates that with Amy. Like she's the one who focuses on like sticking with Resistance, setting up a new headquarters, making sure everything's fine, again, it's like she like Tails is someone who would slow down and focus on like more the here and now rather than constantly moving along. And like of course she was the one she would be someone who would like work within the resistance and continue like doing the stuff like keeping it organized, doing the desk work, trying to keep everybody together. Again, Amy fits that because she is a slightly more ground perspective. Where Sonic, he's the sort of free. He's Sonic well, Sonic, I definitely see can work as a leader, and we do know experiences of him acting like a leader in the game's work. Sonic is like the hero, but he's not like sort of he's the hero of the team. He's the one who gets stuff done. He's the one who saves the day, but he's not really the one who like sort of leads a team through a disaster or keep things organized. Because Sonic is a doer, but he's not really a planner. Is the best way to describe it. Yeah. And I also really like how we get to see Amy lead the Resistance members in this issue. Like, I think it's a really good way of showing that Amy herself has really grown as a character from how she was in the early games of this kid just chasing after her crush in Sonic. Like, again, because not saying Amy, of course, has grown throughout the games, and the way Amy's sort of portrayed in this comic, I feel like, is very much a continuation of her growth seen throughout the games, especially in the adventure games. And like we sort of seeing this sort of like more mature Amy that the games themselves have been building up now for a while. I also loved how like the first issue with Tails we get to see. Oh, sorry. I'm getting a bit mixed up words in my head. I'll say that again. Okay, I really like how just like in the first issue we get to see Sonic and Amy do a bunch of sick team attacks. Like I think this is a really good way of not just having great action in the comics, but also letting the audience know that these characters are people with who are not just friends, but they have a history of like working together and fighting together. You know, like if you're already familiar with Sonic in the comics, like you already know this. But if you're Sonic and the characters, you would already know this, of course. But if you're like just getting into the comics, if this is like your first introduction to Sonic, you wouldn't know these characters have a specific history together right away. But by seeing them how they fight, by seeing these unique team attacks they create, it lets you know that yeah, these people have fought together. They have spent years together. They have spent adventures together. They are not just friends, but they are like comrades, truly. which again, good stuff. It's also, I think it's really funny how chili dogs is the only thing that would make Sonic actually consider coming back to Resistance. Like that's like a good bit, good bit. Also, one thing that I really love about Ian's writing in the storyline is the references he makes to like how he basically references the lyrics from different songs in the Sonic games by incorporating the lyrics into the character's dialogue. Like in issue 2, Sonic says living by my way, my own way in issue 2, which of course references the lyrics in the song It Doesn't Matter, which is Sonic's character theme in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. Again, this is going to show up more later, but this is really cool stuff that I love. We also see at the end of the issue the mysterious mastermind wasn't really accounting for Amy's growth, which I think is another good clue to their true identity. Again, I'll get more into it when we find out. But yeah, issue 3, I love how it opens up with Knuckles just tearing apart one of the mass-produced Death Egg robots we see from Sonic Forces. You know, they're like they look like the Death Egg robot from Sonic Adventure 2. You know, the Eggman one, but instead of like being covered in like sort of Eggman's like face decoration, it's like all pure white. So you definitely, which I think is actually a pretty good idea of showing that this is like a mass-produced thing, not just in the title but also visuals, because it lacks that sort of personalized touch of like the Eggman iconography. But anyway, yeah, back to the comics. I really do love how like we just see Tails Knuckles beating it down with his bare hands and sort of like tearing out its like circuits and stuff. Like it's a really good way of showing not just Knuckles' raw strength, but his very brawler and brutish fighting style, which again really cool. Also, I love how Knuckles when he first sees Sonic is like, long time no see. It's like, yeah, because Sonic and his friends used to say that all the damn time in Sonic games, especially in the 2000s, and I freaking love that stuff, and I'm so glad the comics bring that back. Like, yes, love it when Sonic characters say long time no see. Am I being a huge dork? Am I getting unreasonably hyped over something really silly and dumb? Yes. Do I care? Fuck no! Anyway, back to the comics. I love how the issue sort of characterizes Knuckles as someone who will assume the role of leader when he needs to, but once the emergency is over, he'll step down and resume his duty as Guardians. Because, like, again, like, in Sonic Forces, when Sonic was, like, you know, missing from months, Knuckles was the one who, like, sort of formed the resistance and was their leader. And I actually kind of like that characterization, because I feel like Knuckles is very much someone who, like, has the potential to be a leader, who has, like, what it takes to sort of, like, lead a group, especially in an emergency. But like he doesn't really do that because these guys on duties as Guardians, but also because Sonic is around to sort of like fill that role. Even if it's not quite exactly as a leader specifically, Sonic is the one who like has this role as a hero. So like, but like when there's a situation, when there's a crisis, and Sonic is nowhere to be found, Knuckles is willing to pick up the pieces and be a leader. And I think that really works well as Knuckles' characterization. And I like how the comic like still addresses that and shows that Knuckles is the one who is willing to become the leader in the emergencies when he needs to be, because he has the potential. But once the emergency's on, once that's already taken care of, he will step down and resume his own regular duties as Guardian. Again, really good way of like not just addressing some of the criticisms people had about Knuckles, like sort of like not being around the Master Emerald and Forces, and like how that's not really addressed in the story, but also some people who felt like it was off for Knuckles to be general. Like I feel like it's a way of addressing that without ignoring it, and sort of keeping in line that Knuckles himself, because I personally do think Knuckles would make sense as a leader, especially in an emergency. But yeah, I also love how this comic sort of explains like why exactly the Wisps were like on Earth and Forces, and it's basically like Knuckles in the Resistance with the help of Tails like asked the Wisp to help them defeat Eggman, which is like a really cool idea, because it not only like it's not only the characters like I feel like being smart and sort of using what they know in like previous lore elements to address it in the game, but it's also like I think it's a really good way of like sort of humanizing and giving more characters to the Wisp themselves by showing that like they're the type of people who are willing to like fight and help for others, especially because they know what it's like to be like subjugated and tormented by Eggman, because Eggman and Sonic Colors like took over their whole planet and kidnapped them. So yeah, we also later meet Rough and Tumble, who I think are like really fun villains. They've got like these designs that fit the world of Sonic perfectly, and they have this very nice like simple mook energy. Like you can definitely see these guys being like the minions to a stronger, more intimidating villain, and I think that works really well. It's also, I think the best part is the fact that Knuckles takes them super seriously, whereas Sonic just sort of laughs at them. again, sort of good way of like contrasting Knuckles and Sonic's personality, but also showing that like the goofier aspects of Knuckles' character. Also, I love one of my favorite parts in the fight is when Tumble grabs Sonic in his spinball form and starts bouncing him around like well as a basketball. Like that is just such a good visual gag humor. As and I also love how like Sonic and Co like defeat Rough and Tumble by convincing the Wisp to fight back against the two, like because this is not just like a really clever way to solve a problem, but it's another way this comic I feel like helps like humanize the Whips and gives them a bit more agency, makes them feel a bit more like characters, which I felt like the Colors game from what I played of it was a bit lacking. I don't know, maybe when I eventually finish Colors, I will like feel this a bit more. The Wisps themselves will feel a bit more humanized. But I don't know. From what I played of Colors, the Wisps themselves sort of just feel like power ups or like sort of joke characters at best. I don't know. I still need to finish on Colors one of these days. Also, I think it's like really cool how the end of the issue shows that the Mastermind has noticed that Knuckles isn't on Angel Island right now, meaning the Master Emerald is up for grabs. Which I mentioned earlier when talking about that issue that fans have brought up or criticized games that like where Knuckles isn't on Angel Island and the games don't really sort of address like what's going on with the Master Emerald. So I think this is a good way of sort of taking that criticism and sort of like having it be part of the actual story. Issue 4, we get introduced to one of the IDW original characters, Tangled, and I feel like she has a really good introduction. Like, because with just one page, we already get to see her full fighting style and sort of her fun-loving personality. Because like she fights using her tail to do all these sort of crazy things. In the first issue, like shows that immediately. So like with just one page, we can already tell what this character is all about. She also has this good chemistry with Sonic that I think is like just sort of fun to read. It's sort of how to describe it. But it seems like the best way to describe it, I guess, is like two people who are really in exercise sort of meeting each other in the gym and immediately like getting what each other is all about, and sort of like this, not necessarily a bromance, but like a respect for someone, a respect of someone of the same craft. That sort of thing. And we also see Blaze in this issue, and her fantastic I think is just as incredible with her incinerating entire robot army of robots with their powers and getting like almost an entire page to show off her design. Like really good stuff. The artwork in this issue is great, and the way Blaze is introduced, like it not only presents her as a powerhouse, but it also like really allows her to like show off, which again really good stuff. And it's also pretty cool how they introduce a new original character with a fan favorite character in this image, basically sort of like giving something for both old fans and new fans. That probably sounds a bit weird, but like you know what I mean. Okay. I also love this part where Tangle uses her tail to slingshot Sonic and Blaze to one of the one of the flying bandits. Like that's just I don't know. That's just super funny. It's just one of those like silly fun stuff you'd only see in like a Sonic story. Um, I also think it's interesting how like Blaze explains the reason why she's in Sonic's world right now. Because for those who don't know, Blaze lives in a separate dimension. Is because the Soul Emeralds themselves specifically sent her there, which I think is like it's a very nice way of showing us that whoever this mastermind is, they're a big enough threat to make the Soul Emblems themselves work. Because she says she's here because like the emblems, I mean the Soul Emblems soul, or is it soul emblems or soul emeralds? It's probably soul emeralds. I don't know why. Bleh. But yeah, anyway, but yeah. But like the fact that whoever this mysterious threat is, a big enough threat to get the soul emeralds worried enough to to send Blaze here to help shows us that whoever this villain is, they're like a big enough threat that they could threaten worlds beyond Sonic's. But yeah, also love how at the reveal of Eggman at the end of issue 4, I think it's like really good because it's both his frame is like really creepy, but it's also itself also kind of like inherently silly because like when Eggman's reveal, we see him sort of like looking through the blinders of a like weird house, his like outfit sort of shred, and he's watching a kid talking about how his wagon is broken now. We start crying about it, and everyone's like, oh, I'll fix it, I'll fix everything, and it's just like without the framing, that whole scene comes across as incredibly silly. But again, the way the kind of framed it still comes across as creepy. So it's taking something silly and presenting as creepy, and I think that works really well because that's sort of like the perfect way to describe Eggman. Is that he's like a very silly and goofy character, but he can also be very creepy when necessary. So yeah, like really love how they use that introduction at the end of issue 4 to like not just show Eggman, but also sort of perfectly encapsulate his character in that one scene. Um, I love how issue 5 starts with Sonic and Espio running together on a loop-de-loop path, since like both of them are like the speed characters in Hero, so it makes sense for them to run together. And also, it's so brilliant how the comic reveals that like the Chaotix were the ones looking for the missing Eggman, which is a perfect choice because the Chaotix themselves are like detectives. They are like the main detectives of the Sonic world, so they're the best fit to find a missing person. Well, I guess by Sonic. Well, of course, there are probably definitely other detectives in the Sonic world, but like the Chaotix are like the characters. They're part of like the main cast who are detectives. Okay, and like I also love how like technically, well, okay, and I also really love this part where like Espio like goes on a long tirade to explain the whole situation of how they managed to find Eggman, and Sonic's like, why didn't you just tell me you found Eggman from the beginning? It's like, well, we actually got an anonymous tip that Eggman was here, so we wanted to let you know just how hard we worked to do this, even though we technically weren't the ones that find him. Like, I don't know, it's just a really good funny because the KX themselves have always been a bit of a they're like underdogs in the Sonic world. Because like, sorry, when we see them in Sonic Heroes, they're like living in this apartment just trying to make money to make rents due. And like yeah, so I think that's another way of introducing that sort of like underground underdog smucks underground smucks energy to the chaotics. Yeah, and next up, I have to say that I absolutely freaking love Mr. Tinker. Like this idea of creating a good guy version of Eggman who's a silly workshop man that fixes workshop man that fixes like broken toys and other things for children is such a perfect idea because I feel like it's very much taking like all the potential good of Eggman and like taking the sort of like more positive traits of his character and like using them to positive character traits of his character to show like how he can really be used for good. Because like again, like I think it's sort of like Tails, like where we see before where he's very much a builder, someone who sort of fixes things and helps people like build, and sort of taking that aspect, but doing it in a slightly more humbler way. Because Eggman isn't just like doing a bunch of robot stuff; he's like legit being a handyman, fixing things, doing the simple work as well as the big work. And like again, I think it's a really good way of sort of taking that positive aspects because like if Eggman used his incredible brain for good, he would definitely do something like this. But of course, doing this in a slightly more humble way, which I think is really appealing because like Eggman himself, his design isn't inherently villainous. There's a very goofy, silly, almost grandfather like charm to his character. So like taking those sort of aspects to help create this like Mr. Tinker personality, I think is like really smart. Like and it's a really good way of like taking the those sort of like positive traits you can see in Eggman. Because for those who don't know, originally when Eggman was first created, like originally designed, he was meant to be like sort of a protagonist. I think he was like Mr. Sleep or something. Like if you work at the very first original Eggman design, when he was originally meant to be sort of protagonist, he was like this. He was this man with this big pushy beard and like pajamas, and I think he would like go do adventures in dreams. So again, I can't help but feel like this comic with the IDW comic with Mr. Tinker is on some level drawing back to those ideas. Like it's a really good stuff, and I think it's a really good way of like showing the potential good in Eggman, and in doing so, creating a very charming and likable character. Because like Mr. Tinker himself, like the minute he shows up and the way he dialogues and interacts with people, he's incredibly charming and very nice, and just like he's the type of person you want to have fun with. I could even go as far as to say he's husband material. But yeah, look, I'm not, like, I'm just saying, hear me out, guys. Mr. Tinker, kind of husband goals. I'm just saying, if you married him, you would definitely live a happy life. That's all I'm saying. He's kind of got it. He's kind of got something going on, and I kind of into it, just maybe a little bit. Anyway, I also really love the design for Mr. Tinker with him like wearing these green overalls to contrast his previous like red outfit as Eggman, but I also like how the shirt he wears underneath the green overalls is like a light red shirt, sort of like in a way visually hinting at the threat of Eggman ever returning. Because like, let me start explaining this bit. Okay, so basically, he wears the green overalls to which because green is the opposite color of red to contrast his original red outfit as Eggman to show that like this is sort of a new personality, a new person in that he has become a new person as Mr. Tinkerer, new identity. But the shirt he wears underneath it is a light red, hinting at the fact that even though he has this new personality, the threat of Eggman returning is always there. Which again really good. And I really love this sort of moral dilemma they do with Mr. Tinkerer, where Sonic is like, he's eventually dealing with a new person. Like, this isn't, like, again, he's lost his memories, he's lost his original personality. Eggman has become a completely new person, Mr. Tinkerer. So is it really valid to punish him for the mistakes that not only he can't even remember, from the mistakes of what could many consider a different person? Not only that, but Mr. Tinkerer has done so much good for this village that the Villas themselves have basically accepted Mr. Tinkerer as one of their own and consider him part of the family. So to take him away and punish him would not only hurt this village, but it would definitely, like, on some level be unfair to them, because they haven't just Mr. Tinkerer hasn't just made their lives better; he's become a part of their family. So you would be essentially taking away a member of this village's family and hurting them, which not only as in a question of, like, is it fair to punish Eggman? Is it fair to this village that has grown so much thanks to Mr. Tinker? Like, is this truly just? Is this truly heroic to punish someone for the sins of an identity that they no longer are, for a person they no longer are? And of course, like in real life, that's not how stuff would work. But this isn't real life. This is a cartoony children's story that runs on a sort of own logic. Like, it's not always the best idea to apply, like, real world rules and logic 100%, especially to children's stories, which will apply a more simple and idealistic framing for its sort of storytelling. But yeah, this whole moral dilemma that Sonic goes through is, like, really good stuff. And I also love another way the comic shows just how Mr. Tinker is a completely different person than Eggman. It's sort of like having him be friends with Charmy and sort of seeing them play together, because, like, again, in Sonic Heroes, Charmy beat the absolute crap out of Eggman at the end of Heroes. So taking someone who used to, like, just beat the shit out of Eggman and now showing them be friends, sort of just, like, be nice and pal around, and the fact that Charmy himself, out of all the Chaots, is the one vouching for Eggman the most, again, really, Mr. Tinker really sort of sets up that idea that, yeah, he's become a completely different person from Eggman. You can't really consider them the same person anymore. Like, again, really good stuff. And again, I don't know if this is 100% potential. Maybe they just use Charmy in this because Charmy is a kid, and, like, again, the kids like Mr. Tinker the most, so I guess it would be fitting to have Charmy of the Chaos like Mr. Tinker the most. But I do like to believe it was a callback to Sonic Heroes as a way to show just how much of a completely different person they are. I love the scene where, like, bandits are heading towards the village to attack, and, like, Mr. Tinker, like, he's trying his best to defend the children and comfort them during this time, which again is, like, the thing that, like, finally convinces Sonic that Mr. Tinker is a different person from Eggman, that this isn't just an act. And it's, like, again, it's just such a cute moment. I love Mr. Tinker as a character. He's just so lovable, so cute, and his sort of, like, his dialogues and actions, like, they contrast Eggman in such a way that it makes it so compelling to read. And especially, I really love how it takes sort of, like, Eggman's design and sort of taking the goofy elements in a way to, like, make him even more endearing as a character. But yeah, the ending, the way that issue 5 ends with the reveal that Shadow and Rouge are here is a really, to finish off Eggman says Mr. Tinker, is a really good way to end the issue, because not only is it a good way to tease a Sonic and Shadow fight for the next comic, but it's also a perfect way of making Sonic and Shadow's ideas clash. Because again, like in Shadow's own game, there are multiple different endings where Shadow chooses to kill Eggman. So again, though, of course, Shadow would definitely be one more willing to punish Eggman despite the Mr. Tinker identity and not really willing to accept it. So again, though, this is a really good way of, like, sort of having a really, like, it's an organic way of not only making Sonic and Shadow's fight, but also makes it more compelling and interesting, because it's not just them fighting; it's about their very ideals coming to clash with each other. The cover for issue 6, I have to say, goes incredibly hard. It's like Sonic and Shadow fighting, like, and, like, oh, it's such a cool cover. It really calls back to those, like, sort of the fights they have in the games. Like, really. Now, I love how the fight between Sonic and Shadow starts in issue 6, with the two, like, matching each other in speed. Sonic smirking as his competitive nature come out, and Shadow just glaring at Sonic with this fierce passion that only comes out when he interacts with Sonic. Like, because Shadow himself is very much, he's got this sort of cold, stoic demeanor on the outside, but whenever he interacts with Sonic, Sonic is, like, the only one who can manage to tick him off enough to sort of make his more passionate side burst out of his icy cold exterior. Like, again, really good way of showing these dynamics too. And I feel like Shadow's definitely one of those characters that, like, Sonic himself is a competitive character in a lot of his interactions with other characters, like his bring his competitive side out, especially with Shadow. But I feel like, I mean, especially with Knuckles. Knuckles is really good at like getting Sonic's competitive side out, but I feel like Shadow himself also is able to do it in a way that like I feel like is a bit more revealing of Sonic's like sort of flaws in a way. Like I know it sounds weird, I'm probably not describing the best way, but I feel like Shadow is really able to sort of bring out Sonic's is Shadow the way he contrasts Sonic in a way makes Sonic's flaws a bit more apparent than when Knuckles brings out Sonic's competitive side. Is probably the best way to say it. We also find out that Rouge was the one who gave the anonymous tips of the Chaos about Mr. Tinker's location, specifically so that they would not just assess the situation, but bring Sonic here to meet Mr. Tinker before Shadow does, so that way Sonic would be able to talk Shadow down. Like, it's a really smart way of, like, sort of playing into Rouge's, like, her aspects of a spy and her deception, but also doing it in a way that makes it show that, like, she has a deep respect for these characters and understands their strengths and weaknesses. Again, just a really good way of showing, like, not only how close she is and how much she understands Shadow, but also showing how much she understands Sonic and the Chaotix. Again, really good characterization stuff. I also love one part about the Sonic and Shadow fight, how it starts with Sonic elbowing Shadow and then ends with Shadow elbowing Sonic. Sort of like, the way of things sort of like repeating on each other. But also, I think it's also very interesting that Sonic is low-key kind of the one who instigates the actual fight with Shadow. Which, again, it does make sense because I don't know, sort of a fitting way of like, because they're a rivalry, they have this sort of very much competitiveness, they're dynamic, but also I think it sort of focuses on the idea that Sonic is really the one who brings out the competitiveness because Shadow himself, like, Shadow isn't the type of character who is very competitive. Like, if somebody challenges, he will take it seriously, but he's not really someone who looks for a challenge. Whereas Sonic is the one, he's very competitive and he's very much willing to bring that competitive side out of people to get what he wants. And sort of like that's sort of the best way to describe the rivalry between Sonic and Shadow, where Sonic is very much the instigator of the rivalry and the one who sort of brings out the more hot-headed and competitive aspects of Shadow. So that's why I think it's really good that Sonic is the one who sort of like starts the fight, and I also love how it does end with Shadow like mirroring Sonic's actions at the beginning of the fight to help give us that sort of visual indication of how much Sonic is able to bring out this competitive aspect of Shadow. Because like Shadow only gets competitive when he is challenged by Sonic. That's the only time we really see Shadow himself like acting in a competitive way, which I think is like a really interesting way to do a rivalry. But yeah, I also think the way Sonic convinces Shadow to let Mr. Tinker go is by like reminding Shadow of his own past sins, of his own mistakes, of his because Shadow did try to blow up the world in Sonic Adventure 2, and well, that was partially because his memories were altered by Gerald. Again, it does do that question of like if Eggman can't be forgiven, then Shadow can't. Like if Eggman can't be forgiven, can Shadow be forgiven either? That's sort of like line of like if you get a second chance, if you were allowed to be forgiven for your past sins, for your actions against the world, shouldn't Eggman also get that same right? Because if you're saying Eggman doesn't deserve that, then neither do you. Which again, really good way of like playing in the Shadow's character in history. And like again though, really good way of sort of like ending this fight. Like not just in a way where Sonic wins the fight, so Sonic gets his I would say, but no, Sonic has to specifically appeal to Shadow's like emotions in his own actions to make him like consider this. But yeah, again, really good stuff. Like I know that like the writing with Shadow in the ID comics takes a hint as it goes on, but I feel like in this very first issue, in this very first fight, is a very organic way and a natural way of making Sonic and Shadow fight and come to blows ideologically, while still being consistent with Shadow's character and his development over the years. As well as it just feels very much in character, and it doesn't feel like Shadow's being changed in a way because upper management didn't want him to fit a sort of like Vegeta archetype. But yeah, I also really like the reveal that because like at the end of issue 5, Mr. Tinker is like, "I hope you come back to see Eggman Land," and that sort of like made Sonic worry because like in the games like Eggman Land is like Eggman's like his sort of like end goal or his like world conquering, where it's just like this creepy messed up like amusement park. Like it's sort of his idea of like the ultimate grand base. Like it's a bit hard. I'm probably describing it wrong again, which I've been doing a lot. Like blah. But yeah, again, the Eggman Land is like a terrifying theme park that is Eggman's like one of Eggman's primary goals alongside taking over the world. Well, but I love how this comic like takes a twist on that like idea, revealing that like the actual Eggman land Mr. Tinker was talking about was just a small scale amusement park to amuse the children of the town, and is nothing and is not a mysterious plot. It's like a really good way of like taking something that's sort of villainous and like manipulating into something that's actually cute and innocent and for the good of the people. Really good way of like showing us just how much of a different person Mr. Tinker is by taking something that was previously, evil and messed up and making it something for good. And I really like how he and they still hint the fact that like the old Eggman persona can point out because when Sonic asks why'd you name it Eggman, and he's like, I don't know, the name just came to me. It sounded silly. But yeah, again, really good stuff. Now, I'm just probably saying like, hey, this comic's really good. The characterization's really good. The writing's really good. But like, yeah, it is really good, and I like talking about it. So I'm gonna keep going. But yeah, I also think the ending of issue 6 is a pretty good mindfuck because it shows us the mastermind behind who's been plotting in Eggman's ass, and it's like it's Eggman himself, and it's just like, but we just saw it. So who's what? Yeah, just really good mindfuck, and I love how even the narration of the comic is like, wait, what? What is happening? It's just like again really funny. And next up, we get to issue 7, in which we get the real reveal for the mastermind. Oh boy, it's a good one, baby! Now, issue 7 has an absolutely fantastic opening by showing us Sonic on the swordfish ship for the Egg Fleet in Sonic from Sonic Heroes, which gives me like the peak dopium. You know what I mean? Just like like this issue opens with a massive Sonic Heroes reference, and I freaking love it. Love it, love it, love it. So good. Now then, I also love how like so basically the Eggman we see in the ship who confronts Sonic is of course like a fake one, and I love how he has this giant Cheshire grin the entire time. Well, almost the entire. There is a part where the grin goes down, but for the most part, we see him with this big as heck Cheshire grin. And I believe this is a reference to the Eggman model from Sonic Heroes, which was constantly grinning. And then and if you know that, then you can probably guess already who the master manipulator is. And I also this part when Sonic confronts the fake Eggman, he calls him a faker, because like of course he does. Oh, I love it, love that callback to Sonic Adventure 2. And then we finally get the reveal. We find out who the fake Eggman is and who's been using the Eggman army in Eggman's absence. And it is none other than Neo Metal Sonic. Yes! Yes, 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 my boy! He's back! He's talking again! And he said the thing! He called Sonic a loathsome coffee! Yes, 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 yes! Yes, 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 yes! Oh, baby! Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah! This was so hype to read. For those who don't know, Metal Sonic is my favorite character, and I specifically love him as Neo Metal Sonic, where he finally gets to talk and show off all of his emotions, where his insecurities and hatred for Sonic are on complete and utter display. I adore it. And I also love how this plot twist was foreshadowed by multiple different aspects before this. I already brought up how like the fake Eggman having a Cheshire grin like his model in Sonic Heroes. That of course is a reference, but there's also the fact that like whenever we saw the mysterious mastermind, his text was always a dark blue, like Neo Metal Sonic himself. He underestimated Amy and failed to see how much she grow, which makes sense because Metal Sonic was introduced in Sonic CG, same game as Amy, where he kidnapped her. Um, and of course there's other sort of franchises, like the way he talks seems like the way whenever we saw the Mastermind talk was never like Eggman's way of speaking. It was a bit more mechanical and almost bizarre. Like, and of course the fact that he was like specifically spying on like Sonic and his friends, the fact that he like realized that the Master Emerald was free to taking, the just in general there's a lot of cool hints to this twist and I really loved it. Yeah, and now to talk about the actual action, because there's a fight. Get to see a fight between Neo Metal Sonic and Sonic himself, and it is so good. Like issue 8, like the action in this issue is so good because they use a lot of thick line work for the action lines, which makes every hit and impact feel that much more powerful and heavy. But they also the artwork is still able to present the crazy speed of Sonic and Neo. So like again, just the way the action and the choreography is also good because there's this part where like Sonic like grabs a lance from one of the egg pawns and uses to fight against them. It's just really cool. Everything about the artwork in this issue makes the action fantastic. It's incredibly fast paced, and every hit landed between Sonic and Neo feels all that much more impactful and heavy thanks to the thick action lines. Yeah. If I do have one complaint, though, I'm a little bit disappointed that Neo Metal Sonic is still loyal to Eggman, since, in my opinion, Neo Metal Sonic is sort of meant to symbolize Metal Sonic growing beyond Eggman and being reborn into his own separate threat, more deadly and more hateful than Eggman ever was. Like, again, what makes Neo's Metal Sonic so fun is this sort of Metal Sonic without any restraints, completely being able to show his true self, his true mind, and express his true feelings without any sort of limitation. It's truly Metal Sonic becoming his not necessarily becoming his own person because he still considers him because when he becomes Neo Metal Sonic he sort of like becomes deluded into believing he's the real Sonic. So of course he's not completely his own person, but he's become he it's sort of like going from like a kid to an adult and sort of like separating yourself from your parents. That's sort of like what I kind of seen what Neo Metal Sonic is for Metal Sonic. It's sort of him like growing beyond Eggman. So seeing him like still be loyal to Eggman instead of acting on his own and like doing things for himself for his own sort of motivations of like destroying Sonic and finally proving he's better. I'm a little bit disappointed that like they're still keeping him being loyal to Eggman, but it does fit for like what the story's going for, and I definitely think it makes sense for like later story arc. So I get why they're doing this. It's like a bit of a personal gripe because I would have liked it more if Neo Metal Sonic was sort of like acting on his own and sort of doing what he wanted to do, completely free of Eggman's influence. And I'm also really glad to see that Metal Sonic can still copy data. And I think it's interesting that he like already has Eggman's data, which allows him to sort of like lead the Eggman's robots and sort of like be able to come up with plans from the Eggman, which makes me kind of curious if Neo already had Eggman's data in Sonic Heroes. Maybe that's why he was able to impersonate the Doctor so well. But yeah, I also love this part of the fight where like Neo tears off an Eggpon's head and throws it at Sonic. Like it's a really good way to show not just how rootless Neo Metal Sonic can be, but also how hateful he can be when Sonic's around. Really gives us the fact that like he is truly at his core a monster obsessed with destroying Sonic, and so his worst aspects are all in full display whenever he's around Sonic. Yeah. And I already mentioned before how like the part where Sonic uses the Eggpon's lance is like super cool and it's really good to fight. But probably the coolest part of this issue is where like Neo Metal Sonic, he grabs Sonic, he threatens to throw him down. He threatens to throw him off the ship to his death if if Sonic doesn't tell him where the real Eggman is. Because Sonic already mentioned the fact that he met the Doctor and knows that this face here isn't him. And then Sonic's response is, I never fear the sorry, let me say it again. I never fear the fall. And it's like, yeah! It's so cool because it's a reference to the lyrics from Sonic's theme in Sonic 06, His World. And it's like, it's just a perfect and cool way of using the song lyrics in the dialogue. And it comes across as so cool. And I love it how after Sonic flees, Metal Sonic, like I think when Metal Sonic thinks he kills Sonic, he's like, now I am the one true Sonic. And it's just like, I love this. I love every time Metal Sonic refers to himself as the real Sonic or calls Sonic a copy. I love just how insane and delusional Neo is. How his hatred for Sonic has made him become obsessed with surpassing them to the point where he's convinced himself that he's the real Sonic. It's just such a good stuff. And all these references to Sonic Heroes, it's like pure, absolute ecstasy. And now to go a bit back, I want to talk about issue 7's cover, which is basically the cover is like it's showing like Sonic sort of racing up the ship and stuff. But you don't realize this probably when you first see the cover, but once you go back, you realize that this cover is from Neo Metal Sonic's perspective. Because if you notice, like the cover itself is from a it's from a POV perspective, because you notice that like we're seeing Sonic racing up through the battleship from someone else's eyes, and it becomes quickly apparent that it's Neo Metal Sonic looking down on Sonic. which I think is really cool because it's basically the cover letting us know without saying it that this issue is about Neo Sonic. This issue is his story, and it's so cool. Okay, now then, time to issue 8, which features my boy Silver, and yes, I love seeing him back. Silver is like one of my favorite characters, so I'm so glad he is not just going to be in this comic, but he's going to be in like the first storyline. And it's so cool that we're gonna get an issue dedicated to him. And like I love Silver because like one, I think his design and powers are just super cool. Like psychokinesis is just a really cool power, and I've always loved his design. I like his sort of like unique futuristic gloves and shoes. I love like his bizarre hair. I love the sort of like white color palette they use for him. But most of all, I really love his personality and how it sort of contrasts the other Sonic characters. Like, Silver at his core is a naive optimist trying his best to hold on to hope in a era of despair. He's trying to save his future no matter how many times his future is damned to be a hellscape. And I really admire that. Like, no matter how many things bad, he keeps trying to find the solution and try his best to fight for a better future, even if it seems impossible. And I really like that. And it's sort of a contrast between the other Sonic characters. Most of these characters, besides like Shadow, of course, and maybe like Omega and Rouge, like the other characters are sort of used to living in a sort of peaceful time, living in these sort of happy-go-lucky adventures. Whereas Silver, he's been through shit. He's not used to living a normal, happy life. His future has always been a hellscape. So yeah, that gives a really interesting contrast between characters. But I think one of the most interesting things about Silver is he's kind of like a perfect foil to Shadow. And like Silver, he has this light and angelic design, whereas Shadow's design is very dark and menacing. Like Shadow's is mostly black and Silver is like white, but Shadow's also got like the red accents, and his footwear, his shoes in particular feel slightly a bit more menacing than the other characters. Like it's not full on like spec boots or stuff like that, but it's definitely got this sleek, more angular shape in comparison to everybody's more rounder shoes. But yeah, and like, but also like Shadow himself is a character tied to the past. Like a lot of his arc is about him. Like a lot of his character arcs, and especially like from Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, and the Shadow game, are focused on like Shadow's past and sort of him like how it impacts his characters now, and sort of like him sort of learning to move on beyond the past. So Shadow is a character identified to the past, whereas Silver is a character tied to the future. Like he's literally a time traveler from the future trying to save his world by changing the past. So like Silver's a character, again, Silver's tied to the future, Shadow's tied to the past. But another difference is like Silver, he's like an optimistic kid. He's very naive, very hopeful, trying his best to do the right thing. Whereas Shadow, he's very much a brooding adult. Like out of all the Sonic characters, he's probably the ones that feels the most like an actual adult in sort of his viewpoint and sort of personality. So again, dude, there's a lot of like differences between Shadow and Silver. They contrast each other very much. But what's also interesting is the Silver does actually share some similarities to Shadow, which I think are like most apparent in 06, where we see that Silver has a bit of a dark side that I think is like very similar to Shadow. Because like in Sonic 06, Silver was trying to kill Sonic in the hope, believing that would fix his future. We also see that Silver is arguably as angsty as Shadow can be, if not more so. So again, though, yeah, like I feel like the way Silver and Shadow they very much contrast each other a lot, but Silver himself also has these like inherent similarities to Shadow in a way that just sort of they have this very interesting dynamic because of that. And I know that's not like talking too much about like what actually happens in the issue itself, but like where else am I going to get an excuse to like sort of like gush about like the differences and similarities between Silver and Shadow? Okay, next up, it's also like really later in the comic, like okay, basically like Silver is helping Sonic go through base, and then they get help from this mysterious guardian angel, as Silver talks about it, and basically mentions how that there was like during the war times there was a mysterious sniper who's always helping people from the background. They never joined the group. They were never like they were always off to the side helping people, and Silver kind of idolizes them because of that, which makes sense, of course. Like Silver is definitely the person who would idolize like a mysterious stranger helping people from afar. And I really and this character is basically revealed to be another IDW original character called Whisper. And I really like how we get this introduction to her as a mysterious guard angel. But later, when they finally meet her, Silva like tries to introduce himself because he's a big fan, and this scares Whisper, and she panics and sort of tries to hide away. And Sonic basically points out to Silver that Whisper is like she's an introvert. She's not the reason why she kept her distance from everyone and didn't regroup is because she's like basically like a bit of a scared. She prefers like being alone and is a bit scared of hanging around large groups of people. And I really like how like Sonic himself is like very respectful of Whisper and is able to like tell her deal right away. Yeah, but I also Silver himself, he's not familiar with the concept of like of people who I just said it and now I forgot the term, but introvert, yeah, introvert. Like Silver's not used to the idea of introvert because like he spent so much of his time in the future like alone and by himself that the idea of like somebody the idea of somebody who doesn't want to be around people is sort of foreign. Like it's kind of funny, but it's also really sad. Oh, and speaking of stuff about Silver's character that's kind of sad but really kind of poetic. Like basically Silver, when Sonic asks Silver why he's still here, Silver basically says that yeah, taking down Eggman after he took over the world wasn't enough to fix my future. My future's still kind of this hellscape. He mentions how it's like this empty world devoid of life, just like weird metallic plants and stuff. And yeah, and basically this aspect of the basically like I mentioned it before, but like Silver's future, no matter how many times he fixed up, still ends up getting screwed over. He like every time he tries to change the past, he never can completely save his future for good. Which is like it's really sad and sort of depressing, but it's also kind of poetic about Silver's character, the fact that he remains this optimist despite the fact that he keeps having to fix things. He keeps trying his best to keep his future from being a hellscape by having to change things over and over again. He keeps going through these harrowing journeys to save his future, and even though the victories he gets seem to be temporary and his future keeps getting screwed over, he doesn't give up. He remains that optimist, which I think is like really good. Also back to Whisper, I love her like Wisp sniper rifle. It's like just a really cool idea, I think, for a Wispin. And like I really love how she like has a bunch of wisps that fight alongside her, which makes it very fitting that her name is Whisper. But yeah, like she basically got her own team of wisps that all work together to help her like do these cool different like types of like shots with their sniper rifle. Just in general, really cool. And now that I think about it does make a lot of sense that Whisper would be like a character who like is very quiet, doesn't hang around a lot of people, tends to whisper instead of speaking loudly, who would be friends with the wisps, who even though they can't talk, usually talk don't usually speak the normal English language and tend to like very much emote through body language and stuff. Like I don't, yeah, it's just very fitting that Whisper makes the special connection with the wisps. Yeah. Also, I also said before how I really like how Sonic is like super respectful, Whisper being an introvert. Like I don't know, it's just this kind of like Chadley aspect of Sonic. He's very quick to understand like what he's very quick to understand people's sort of like boundaries and very much focuses on respecting them. Also, I love Whisper's design. She's a wolf and wears a cool cloak and a cool mask. And Drill just like us. I think it's probably one of my favorite designs of the IDW original characters. Like really good stuff. And so later we see the three of them all work together, and they end up having to fight against a new E1 series robot called E107 Theta, which I loved seeing this. Like, not only is it cool to see another E series robot, but I really love how the fight against E107 Theta is very much presented like a boss battle you see in an actual Sonic game. Like, the way they fight it, the team attacks the characters for full, a lot of the choreography, it all feels like you're watching like somebody actually play through a boss fight in a Sonic game, which is really nice. I also love how we see that Knuckles has a specific psychic link with the Master Emerald. Like, it's just a cool idea. And in basically, yeah, at the end of the issue, we find out that Neo Metal Sonic has successfully managed to take over Angel Island and has built a throne atop the Master Emerald, which is like such a huge power move. It really makes him live up to his title in the comic as like a mechanical mastermind by having him take over the literal Master Emerald, which has the power to control the other Chaos Emeralds. Which isn't smart that he specifically took over that. And it's also a really good way of showing just how far Neo has successfully conquered Master Island by essentially like finding its heart and taking it over and transforming it into his throne. Just in general, a bunch of really good visuals to show that Neo is truly living up to his title as a mastermind. That he is now the one in control, as he now literally has the Master Emerald under his thumb. I also love Neo also gets another title in the comic called the Steel Nemesis. Like that just goes so hard. That is cool. That is super, super cool. Now, issue 9 has an absolutely fantastic cover where we get to see Neo Metal Sonic take on both Knuckles and Sonic effortlessly as they both like the cover is basically like we're seeing both of them like trying to punch Neo Metal Sonic, but Neo Metal Sonic is like got his he's already like caught both of their fists with his hands effortlessly. I also like how this cover is like from the perspective you can tell it's like from the perspective of Sonic and Knuckles because you see their reflections in Metal Sonic's face, so you get the impression that like this comes from their perspective, which makes it is super cool because it makes it feel like you, the reader, are fighting alongside Sonic and Knuckles, which it's just I really love it when comics or mangas do stuff like that where they frame something from the specific point POV of the characters themselves. Again, I don't just mean from the POV as in like I mean literally POV as in like you're seeing the story through their little eyes because it makes you feel like you're alongside them. But yeah, Neo's narration on the first page is fantastic, with him referring to himself as Sonic the Hedgehog Perfective, because it basically shows us that yes, Neo Sonic is still as batshit crazy as he was with Heroes, where he's completely deluded himself into believing that he is the true Sonic. 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 Bleh. Da 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 da. Okay, back to the thing. Okay, and I also really like how Neo refers to Sonic and his friends as heroes in quotations, which I really read as two ways. One, Neo is showing his resentment towards the word heroes for like obvious reasons. Like at the end of Sonic Heroes, he's like, "Why? Why can't I defeat you?" And Sonic is like, "Because we're Sonic Heroes." And like, of course, he would resent that term because, like, yeah, it would probably piss anybody else off if that was the response they got to for why they lose. Or I can read it as another way, which is Neo doesn't believe Sonic and his friends to be true heroes because he sees himself as the real Sonic, and thus anyone who opposes him cannot be considered true heroes. Basically, he sees himself as the real hero, and everybody else is just like pretenders or copies, which that is really cool. I also like how like the comic brings up Blaze's super form, Super Blaze, where she's like and the comic goes out to explain why she doesn't join Sonic and Knuckles on the fight against Neo Sonic. And it's basically because they don't want to risk Neo obtaining bio data on the Burning Blaze form. So instead, to avoid that risk, they have her like instead focusing on using her super form to fight against the Egg Fleet, which again is also a major threat because the Egg Fleet is like probably one of Eggman's most deadly inventions. Like just because like again in Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Mouse Eggman had just one fleet, just one not spaceship, but like one ship, and it could already do massive damage. Like it had this giant laser that could like level cities, and now in Sonic Heroes, Eggman has an entire fleet of ships just like that. So again, the Egg Fleet is like probably one of the most dangerous things Eggman has. Even the Archie comics, they show us how dangerous the Egg Fleet ships can be, with them like completely destroying Knothole. So yeah, having Burning Blaze focus on the ships instead of fighting Neo Sonic is a good choice. I also just love how we get to see like Sonic and his friends hanging out on the ship as they're just flying to Angel Island. Like it's a really good way of sort of characterizing these characters and showing that yes, all these guys really are friends. Also, there's a part where like where Rouge is asking Shadow why he comes and like you're part of the team yet you keep trying to distance everyone, and it's like, and that of course draws a parallel to Whisper, who then gives Shadow this weird look, and it just made me wonder like, what do you know, Whisper? Is Shadow hiding something? Do you know something? Like I'm probably overthinking that. I doubt that's really intended, but that's sort of the vibe I got when I was reading the comic. I also love how the comic goes out of the way to show like how much Blaze has grown to care for all of her friends in Sonic Dimensions, which are thinking about how like before she would always try to keep her distance from them, she was always so defensive, and now she's like fighting alongside them and comrades in like what could be considered like another war with their fight against Neo Metal Sonic to reclaim Angel Island. I also love this bit where like Tangles is asking Silver if he can use if he's using his psychic powers to cheat, and he's like, "What? No, that's not how they work." And she's like, "Okay." And then we see that Tangles herself is actually trying to cheat. Like she's asking Silver if she's cheating just to distract him from her own cheating. Now, that's funny. And finally we get to the heat of the action in which their ship finally arrives to Angel Island, and they're already having to deal with the Egg Fleet trying to shoot them down. I love this part where you see Sonic and Knuckles using their hoverboards from the Rider games, like in order to discreetly fly down onto Angel Island so they can fight Neo Metal Sonic. And just like that is a really cool Easter egg. That is a really clever way of referencing stuff from the previous games in the game and using them as a sort of like minor plot thing. And next up, we get to see all of Sonic's friends join together to fight against Neo Metal Sonic's fleet of ships. And I just have to say, it is so cathartic seeing all of Sonic's friends work together again. Because we haven't seen these guys fight together in a long time in the game. So getting to see them all fight together is like this big army in the comics is just like so much fun. So cool seeing everybody here. And I love how they like team up. Team up with, because like all of Sonic's friends from the previous issues are all in this battle against Neo Metal Sonic, and it's so cool. And next, we end up getting to see the fight between Sonic, Knuckles, and Neo Metal Sonic, and it is just like one of the most hyped things I've ever seen in comic, because Neo Metal Sonic uses the Master Emerald to gain super, just like Mecha Sonic did in Sonic and Knuckles. And then as he comes down to strike them, he quotes lyrics from the final boss named Sonic Heroes, "What I'm Made Of," which was specifically written from Neo Metal Sonic's perspective. So he's quoting, and it makes it so satisfying, so cool when he begins quoting these actual lyrics from the song. So cool. Like he's like, "Now show me, Sonic Heroes, what you're made of." It's just like, oh, it's so cool, so cool. Like I'm probably forgetting the exact things he said. Like again, seeing those lyrics get quoted in this is so cool. Especially love the whole like black mark. Now you'll be black marks on the floor. I love it how when Neo Metal Sonic says it's so cool. And I'd say the fight between Sonic Knuckles and Super Neo Metal Sonic is so much fun because we just get to see Neo Metal Sonic wipe the floor with Sonic and Knuckles. And it is so cool to like get to see another fight against Neo Metal Sonic, because in Sonic Heroes we never actually got to fight Metal Sonic in Neo form. They like skip right away to like his final boss forms like Metal Overlord and stuff like that. So the comic itself is basically allowing Sonic fans to fulfill a long lost dream by getting to see this fight between Sonic Knuckles and the Neo form. Also, but while they're fighting Sonic, we get to while Sonic and the gang are fighting Neo Metal Sonic, we see like um rough and tumble like kidnapping Dr. Tinker, and I was like, no, you leave this man alone. Don't you touch him. He's mine. But yeah, it's like, no, you bastards, leave Mr. Tinker alone, because like you just know, oh no, things are gonna get shit. He's gonna get his memories again. Shit is not gonna look good for these guys, even if they win this fight. And it's just like, oh, I feel sad. I feel sad that Mr. Tinker is going because he wasn't around here for that long. But he was a really fun character. But you know now, yep, it's not, because you know it's not gonna last. Because like again, this is a Sonic comic. Eggman is Sonic's arch enemy, so of course he's gonna come back. Um, I also like how we get to see like Tails' adherent Sonic's impatience, because Tails later like does goes off to do his own plan to like use where he grabs basically like the main ship of the Eggman fleet. He takes it over and then he starts using it to fight against Eggman's robots. And I think and basically Rouge and Amy have a conversation about that where Rouge is like, couldn't he have given us a warning before he started firing? He's like, Tails, he was raised by Sonic. He's gonna be impatient like that. Like that's just really good characterization and stuff. And then we come back to the fight, and Neo's Metal Sonic like bitch slaps Knuckles, and it's like, yeah, you go, my boy, you go, my son, slap him. It's so fun. But yeah, and later we see like Shadow himself join in on the fight, and I really love how like the comic shows us like Shadow wielding the Chaos Spheres like an actual spear instead of just using the projectiles, which I think is really cool because that's something I've always wanted to see. Because while I think the Chaos Spheres is really cool, it always bugged me how they're just a projectile and we don't actually see Shadow wield it like an actual weapon. So getting to see him use it like an actual spear in this comic is really cool. And then the best part happened because Shadow was fighting Neo Metal Sonic. He was able to acquire the data of the Ultimate Life Form, and now he can transform just like he did in Sonic Heroes. Now that he has like Sonic's data and Shadow's data, and while he doesn't have the Chaos data, he has the Master Emerald to stick with that, and he gets transformed. And I love how the transformation sticks, where Neo Metal Sonic's head just like transforms into this horrific, monstrous mouth with like teeth and stuff, and it's like, yes, I love it when Metal Sonic transforms into a giant monster with freakish teeth, and it's just so horrific and violent looking. It's the coolest. Also, this is the issue where I started seeing the problems with Shadow's characterization in the EW comics. He just comes across as a little bit too cocky and too eager to fight. because like Sonic and Knuckles are like, hey, it's not a good idea for you to fight him. He might get your bio data, and he's like, so what? I can take him down before that happens. And it just, it feels a little bit too arrogant. And Rouge even mentioned earlier that Shadow was leaving to take down the biggest challenge, and it kind of seems like the comic is sort of framing Shadow as someone who's like looking for a fight, who wants to fight the biggest, most dangerous threat, and is a bit too cocky, a bit too arrogant. And like you can tell that like the Vegeta syndrome is starting to kick in with Shadow in these sort of like moments, which I'm not blaming Ian for it, because like it's become very clear that like these are the results of Sega mandates for Shadow's character, which have vastly caused, which are not only causing problems to result in him being sort of like out of character, but have also like definitely harming the way that the people are trying to write Shadow. It's very clear that the people who were working on the IDW comics weren't very happy with these mandates that Sega was giving them for Shadow, which is like, it's very good to hear that like Sega is loosening the mandates on Shadow and allowing writers to like do what they want with him, which I definitely think is going to help. Sorry, Shadow's character, like he's gonna the Vegeta syndrome that Sega has unfortunately been trying to put on Shadow is gonna start disappearing. He's gonna be more in line with his proper characterization that we saw in games like Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, Shadow game, and Sonic 06. Yeah, I like Master Overlord, which is Metal Sonic's new transformation where he uses the Master Emerald. I think it looks cool, but I don't like it as much as Metal Overlord from Sonic Heroes. I think that's because it just looks a little bit too clean in comparison to the grungier and edgier look that Metal Overlord had. Like it had this sort of like short cobbled together, sort of messy and ugly look to it that I thought was really cool. Whereas Metal Master Overlord just looks a little bit too shiny, a little bit too clean. He's missing some of the rougher aspects that I think really make Metal Overlord look cool. And yes, he calls Sonic his lowest copy as he's in this transformation. It's so cool because it's a direct callback to the final hero, the final boss of Sonic Heroes, where he, at the start of the final boss, Metal Overlord directly calls Sonic his loathsome coffee. And it's like, yes, 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 let's go! Let's go! Yeah, I'm loving all these Sonic Hero references. One of my favorite games, and I am loving how they're using Metal's characterization from that game to write him in this comic. Just really good stuff. The cover to issue 1 to issue 11 is also fantastic. Like, it's just this big cover with all the other characters, and it's focusing on Neo Metal Sonic, sort of like transform. Like, it's like you see Metal Sonic and you see Neo Metal Sonic, and then you see the Master Overlord. It's just a really fantastic and gorgeous looking cover, and it really does give you a feeling that like we are now seeing the final battle in this. And I also love how Master Overlord can like is able to shoot like chaos shards as an attack. Like, that's a really cool detail. And I also love how we see through this fight that Sonic is capable of coming up with strategies to take down big monsters like Master Overlord. But since strategies are like very simple and kind of rely on sort of like the reckless actions that Sonic himself make, which I think is really cool. And while we see the good guys fighting, we see who hired Rough and Tumble to capture the good Mr. Tinkerer, and it's another IDW original character, Dr. Styline, who is firmly established as a Dr. Eggman fanboy. And I really like his design. I specifically love the color scheme of like magenta, silver, and gray. I was thinking it's really cool that he's a platypus, since we haven't got to that animal as a Sonic character yet, and the way they sort of use that for design is like really cool. Like, I won't lie, there are a few first times where I'm mistaken for a duck, but that's probably because, like platypuses and ducks both have. Well, I think the actual proper plural for platypus is like platypi. But yeah, they both have that sort of beak thing. But yeah, it's a really good design, and yes, clearly the Dr. Starlin, he's the one who's going to revert Mr. Tinker back to Eggman, and again, I'm gonna miss Mr. Tinker. He was so much fun to read, just a fun character, and I'm gonna miss him. I'm gonna miss my sweet man, because he was nice, and unfortunately, we're gonna get back the old Eggman. But Eggman himself is also fantastic, so I'm gonna love to see how. And Ian himself is shown to be really good at writing Eggman, so I can't wait to see more of that in the run. But yeah, I really love how Sonic decides he's got to distract Metal Overlord so his friends can come by to be the cavalry in the fight. And I love how he does it by pissing him off by calling out Metal Sonic for his huge identity crisis, pointing out the fact that no, Metal Sonic, you're just a robot copy. You're not the real thing. I love his lines of like color me I don't think hedgehogs are supposed to look like giant robotic dragon monster things. Also, didn't I come first? It's just like, he's just like pissing Metal Sonic off by driving his identity crisis up the wall. And I just love seeing Metal Sonic like, no, I am the real Sonic. I am Sonic the Hedgehog perfected. I have surpassed you. He's like, you can see all of his insecurities, his hatred, his anger, his jealousy, his envy, all of these wrapped, all of these, like, again, his insecurities, his mental hangings all coming to the foreground as like Sonic like pisses him off so that everybody can like commence their like massive attack on Metal Sonic. It's so cool seeing everybody like work together to fight him. Specifically, I love this part where like Master Overlord knocks everybody else off, and Silver has to use all of his psychic powers to save everyone from falling to their death. Like, I love it when we get to see Silver get to cut loose and use his powers to their full extent. Really cool. But I think the best part of the fight is when Tails uses his ship to ram into to Master Overlord, laying a massive hit down on him. Like, it's so cool. It's like something you would see on a heavy metal concert, just like this giant battleship crashing into this robotic demonic monster. Just dopest shit ever, man. And another thing that's interesting is that Metal calls Tails unworthy child. And I think this is really cool because it basically shows that not only does Metal look down on Sonic's friends, but he doesn't really understand why Sonic keeps them around. Like, to Metal Sonic, the only things that matter in this world are himself, Sonic, and Eggman. So he considers everyone else to be unworthy of himself. Which, again, really cool stuff. Just a lot of stuff. But yeah, that's how it basically ends. Knuckles is able to get the Master Emerald out of Master Overlord, reverting him back to normal Metal Sonic, and the good guys win. Again, fantastic stuff. And now we move on to issue 2, which has another fantastic cover that I absolutely love, and it's Metal Sonic just covered in chains, hanging off them, symbolizing that no matter how powerful Metal Sonic becomes, no matter what form he takes, even if he can talk, even if he can form a new identity, he will always be a prisoner of his own hatred and his own hatred for Sonic and his insecurities. And like, I'm probably reading too much into it. I have a feeling that's probably not what the artist intended when they drew this cover, but that's what I am interpreting, and I have the right to interpret whatever I can't interpret literally whatever I want from art, but I am allowed to interpret things from art if they fit within the established story and don't contradict anything. And I think interpreting this cover as Metal Sonic, as representing how Metal Sonic is forever a prisoner no matter how much power he attains, is really cool. Now, basically, in issue 2, we see that Sonic had Tails repair Metal Sonic, and is offering Metal Sonic a second chance to live his own life, since he now thinks Eggman is taking care for good with his new identity as Mr. Tinkerer, unaware that Dr. Sterling is already turning him back into Eggman. And I think this is really interesting that the Sonic is basically giving Metal Sonic a second chance of his own life, because it shows that Sonic really does like consider Metal to be his own person. He doesn't see him the same way he sees other Eggman robots. He considers Metal Sonic a person the same way he considers like Omega or like the other sort of robot friends he's met over the series as real people, not just soulless machines. And so he believes that Metal Sonic has the right to his own freedom, just like everybody else. He doesn't see Metal as a Metal copy. He sees him as a person with his own thoughts and feelings, and thus is deserving that freedom. But unfortunately for Sonic, the first thing we see Metal Sonic do when he's given this Metal chance and is given true freedom is that he rejects Sonic's hands of compassion. Because Metal Sonic isn't evil because he was forced to be by Robotnik, or he's forced to by his programming. No. This issue reveals to us pretty plain and simple that Metal Sonic is like this because he chooses to be. Metal Sonic hates Sonic, hurts people, and endangers the world because it's what he wants to do. Metal Sonic is, at his core, a hateful, vindictive, and insecure monster who wants nothing more than to destroy Sonic just so he can prove that he is superior, to prove he's the real Sonic. He isn't like this because Eggman built him to be this way, or because he's forced to by programming, or because of some other third thing. Metal Sonic is like this because he chooses to be. This is who Metal Sonic is. A monster of hatred and insecurities. No, wait, let me say that again. It's like, find a cool way. This is who Metal Sonic is. A monster of hatred riddled by insecurities that drive him to madness. This is who Metal Sonic is. There we go. That sounded like cooler, didn't it? I'm a huge dork right now, but yeah. Yeah. But also later in the issue we come back to see that even though Eggman has had his memory restored, he still has the Mr. Tinker personality. His true personality doesn't bring up yet. And but Dr. Stern questions that it'll probably take some sort of emotional response in order to truly revert him back to the original Eggman. And that's when Metal Sonic shows up in need of repairs, and that is what finally triggers Eggman's old personality return and signaling us the true death of Mr. Tinker. Eggman is back, and Sonic himself is indirectly responsible for it, since he was the one who allowed Metal Sonic to go free. And this is like really good because not only does it add the sinusoid to drama and add more weight to the consequences of Sonic's actions, but it shows that if Sonic truly wants to stay true to his ideals, he's going to have to accept the consequences of said ideals. That if Sonic just let Metal Sonic rot away, that if he just destroyed him, if he didn't consider him a person, if he didn't try to spare him or show him mercy, then Eggman wouldn't have come back and this all could have avoided. But Sonic can't do that. That's not what Sonic believes in. That's not true to Sonic's ideals. And because Sonic kept true to his ideals, Eggman has returned, and now Sonic is going to have to face those consequences. Sorry for being a bit repetitive on that part. I try not to repeat myself too much in this podcast, but there are certain times in which I got to restate what I'm trying to say in order to better get across what I mean. But yeah, with Eggman back, Starline reveals that he has already acquired the Chaos Emeralds for Eggman, which I think is a really smart way to set him up as a capable and effective antagonist. And I also love this gag where like Ruff and Tumble are asked because they were helping Starline in exchange for like getting weapons from Eggman, and they are like, "What the heck is with these, Eggman? These weapons aren't going to work for us at all." And then Eggman like is like, he reveals to them that they have the wrong weapons. That like basically Ruff has Tumble's weapons and Tumble has Ruff's weapons. They don't literally have the weapons yet. They have like the blueprints for the weapons that Eggman gave them, and they of course got them mixed up. So Eggman has to get across straight like which ones they're supposed to have. And like I don't know, it's just a really funny gag. Like you have to read it to like get it, but like again, I think it's really funny. So the rest of the issue is basically down on like the rest of the Sonic and other characters having downtime, and Sonic just sort of like making chavs and checking up on everyone. And like I think that I have a slight problem with the scene where he checks up on Knuckles, which is I think it makes sense for Knuckles to disband the Resistance and return to his duties as Guardian. Since like again the threat's over, and I said before that Knuckles is someone who will assume the position of leadership only in like emergencies where he really needs to do it, only where it's like needed of him. But once the problem's gone, he will go back to his previous responsibilities as Guardian. And I think that's good. But something that kind of bugs me is when he like tells Sonic and Co to get off his island. Like I don't know, that feels like a slight regression of his character. But I feel like he and Sonic are on friendly enough terms in which you wouldn't tell them to just leave his island. But on the other hand, the line probably wasn't meant to be read as harsh as I'm interpreting it. Like the artwork himself sort of presents it as something a bit more like, as a presents the whole scene as less like Knuckles being serious and more like Knuckles just being tired and wanting to be left alone. So yeah, I'm probably overthinking it. I also love this part where the Chaotix are like, "Hey Amy, where's our fucking money? Where's our fucking money at?" Because they finished their job, they found Eggman, and now they want to get paid for their work. And it's just like, it's so funny how Amy's like, "Doesn't being in the Resistance mean anything?" Because it's like clear that Amy doesn't have the money at the moment. It's just like really funny. I also like how we get to see Blaze and Tails. I'm sorry, not Blaze and Blaze and Silver just sort of hanging out together towards the end. Because I really like their dynamic, and I hope we get to see them more in the future, which luckily we do in the Animal comic, which I will talk about this issue. I'm also glad to see that Silver is going to be saving for the present for a while. Love my sweet boy, and can't wait to see him get more screen time. And just in general, all these scenes of Sonic checking up on everyone is really good, and they really do goes a long way to show like Sonic's chemistry with everyone. The ending of this issue I think is also really unsettling because like Eggman refers to his time as Mr. Tinker as an indignity, and he believes it to be such an ingrained indignity that he needs to make the world suffer in turn for it. And it's like that's such a creepy thing to think about because it basically implies that Eggman thinks that there is no greater insult in this world than to be a good and humble man. It's just like, it's chilling. And it really sets up to that what we're going to get in the next arc is going to be some dark, messed up stuff, which I am looking forward to. So to finish this off, I'm going to be talking about the annual, which was listed at the end of the at the end of the reading order in the THANKSKENPENDERS blog for this first storyline. But first off, I really love the art style for the cover of the annual. It reminds me a lot of the art style for the Sonic battle games, which I think is really cool. But basically, the annual is an anthology of different stories, and I'm not going to be talking about all of them, just some of the major points of the ones I like. The first one is basically one about Tangled, Whisper hanging out together in Tangled's hometown and meeting like basically Tangled's childhood friend, um, Jewel. Yeah, I think its name's Jewel. I might be forgetting. I don't feel like going back to check, but I'm pretty sure her name is Jewel. And basically, like, she has a museum of all the stuff like Tangled has acquired over her adventures and journeys, and then we get to see the Babylon Rouge show up and steal all this stuff from the museum. And it was like so much fun seeing the Babylon Rouges again, because I think they're like really fun characters in the Sonic world. And we haven't seen them in like a really long time, so it's cool to get to see them show up again in this comics. And I really kind of like how they're set up as like these like they're not really bad people. They're thieves, but they're not horrible people. But they're also just like they're kind of buffoons in a really fun way. And specifically, I really like how Jet is sort of characterized, where like he's basically if Sonic was more arrogant and had a huge chip on his old shoulder. So that makes his characterization really fun, and like why I think his rivalry with Sonic in particular is an interesting one. Like I don't like him as much as other rivals like Shadow or Metal Sonic, but I think Jet himself, the way he contrasts Sonic, is very interesting. I also really love this bit where like one of the big bruiser of the Background Road, you know, like the tough strong guy who's kind of down. I can't remember his name. Maybe it was Wave. I think it might have been Wave. Yeah, where he steals Jewel, where he kidnaps Jewel by accident, mistaking her for a literal Jewel, not realizing she's a beetle. It's just like so goofy, and I love how the interactions between them and Tangled, because it's clear the Babylon Roaches aren't like serious threats. They're kind of huge goofballs, and I really love how like, we don't kidnap people. What the heck, Wave? And then the Jet's also like trying to challenge Tangled to a race because like he's trying to protect his image, but he's being a complete dumbass about it. And I don't know, it's just really funny. I probably explained this poorly. I was kind of getting a little bit tired when I was reading the annual, so I didn't have a bunch of notes on it. But like, yeah, I really love seeing the Babylon Roaches again. Another of the stories we get to see like Sonic piloting a tornado, which is nice because the tornado is his plane, and we never really get to see him piloting games, so it's cool to see him in the comics. But my favorite story in this annual. Well, this annual is an anthology, but my favorite my favorite story of the anthology in this annual comic is the Silver and Blaze story, where Blaze is helping Silver plant and grow his own garden. It's like super cute, and I love this idea of Silver just being fascinated by the idea of growing life and having a garden, since like of course stuff like this wouldn't exist in his future. And an optimist like him would just love the idea of like growing plants and taking care of a garden. And in general, I just love seeing Silver and Blaze together. I think they're super cute, and I love their dynamics. So I'm so glad this annual gave me more of them, since we didn't get to see them interact much more in the last arc. But yeah, that's it for my thoughts on the annual. It was a fun comic. I like anthology type stories. It was nothing amazing or anything. I don't think it was as good as the rest of the storyline. But yeah, I'm really loving the IDW comics. This first storyline was really fun. I'm so glad that we had all these references to Sonic Heroes, and I'm really glad we got to see Metal Sonic be the main villain of a story, since he hasn't been the main villain of a story in any sort of Sonic stories since like Sonic Heroes. And Metal Sonic has always been my favorite Sonic character and villain. So I was really glad he was the antagonist, even though I wish he was a bit more of his own independent force instead of still being loyal to Robotnik. What we got was still amazing, and I'm super looking forward to the next arc in the Sonic comics, which is, I believe, the Metal Virus storyline, which is much longer than this storyline and is considered by many to be one of the best stories in Sonic Comics. So yeah, thank you all for watching my podcast. Hope to see you guys again next week, and remember to have a fantastic day. Oh, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to see more. Bye, everyone!